Ukrainian soldiers are conducting a successful offensive operation in the south of the Dnipropetrovsk region. In the area of the village of Ternov, assault troops broke through the enemy's defenses and advanced more than 10 kilometers. The operation is ongoing. Air assault troops are also carrying out offensive actions in the direction of Oleksandrivka. In one of the villages, as a result of a precise strike on a concentration of invaders, 10 Russian occupiers and their equipment were destroyed.
This is probably a question of social psychology. The remarkable willingness of the Russian people to go to their own slaughter, not for some vague cause. They serve no higher purpose, but exist solely for the personal whims and the specific wishes of their authoritarian dictator. Vladimir Putin and his inner circle, his generals and his colonels as well. Generally speaking, ordinary Russian people and their soldiers are often treated as nothing more than expendable cannon fodder.
According to the General Staff of the Armed Forces of Ukraine, most of the Russian attempts to break through Ukrainian positions have occurred. The defense forces have repelled attacks since the beginning of the day in the Huliaipol sector as well as in the Pokrovsk and Kostiantynivka sectors of the front. As military experts note, the invaders have still not achieved their objectives either in the south or in the east of Ukraine.
2 years have already passed and the entire agglomeration, Pokrovsk, Myrnohrad, they still cannot accomplish their tasks. Hours of fighting there in Prishain and Rodinsky as well. They continue to fight and do not allow the enemy to carry out these plans. Although, in part, they are once again redeploying forces from this area to places where, as they see it, there is a need to intensify combat operations, including here. From this perspective, in terms of reinforcing these directions, and in Zaporizhzhia, further north, in Leninopol, the situation is developing. They are responding in this way.
The Tavria paratroopers demonstrated effective work in destroying Russian occupiers in the area of Myrnohrad, Donetsk region. The soldiers note that FPV crews are operating almost directly on the line of contact, striking enemy shelters, enemy personnel, and conducting remote mining of Russian logistical routes. Just in the past day, Ukraine's defense forces destroyed 13 Russian tanks, 7 armored combat vehicles, and 73 artillery systems. They also took out 4 multiple rocket launcher systems and 2 air defense systems, destroyed over 200 pieces of special equipment, and shot down more than 2,000 enemy drones. In addition, just yesterday, Ukrainian soldiers eliminated another 950 Russian occupiers along the entire front line. Thus, according to the General Staff of the Armed Forces of Ukraine, the total combat losses of Russian troops since the beginning of the full-scale invasion have reached almost 1,275,000 soldiers.
Joining our broadcast is Pavlo Lakiachuk, Head of Military Programs at the Center for Global Studies, Strategy 21. Pavlo, we welcome you to the Freedom Broadcast. Glory to Ukraine.
Good evening, glory to the heroes.
Pavlo, we are discussing the situation at the front, particularly in the context of the losses suffered by the enemy's army since the beginning of the full-scale invasion. Only at the very start of the full-scale invasion was there some understanding. Everyone judges according to their own perception of the world. But for some reason, it seemed to all of us that there was a psychological threshold. For the enemy, the number of losses at the front, but in reality, it doesn't exist. Putin absolutely doesn't care about the Russian population, about the indigenous peoples, even those that are small in number. But there is still, as we now understand, some kind of physical threshold, if that's the right way to put it. A threshold for Russian losses at the front. In Kenya, people are already protesting against the recruitment of their sons to the front. I think that African countries will gradually start to wake up and realize that their locals are not being invited to Russia to work in supermarkets. And with its own resources, only large-scale mobilization would make it possible, which is very dangerous for Putin. Do you think that Russia is already approaching this point, in the context of losses reaching the point of no return?
Well, you see, you mentioned the African country of Kenya, where the local population is protesting against recruitment into the Russian army of these butchers. And in the Russian region of Kalmykia, one of the most downtrodden various regions across Russia, which are known to have some of the most significant and highest percentages. The ratio of those recruited and mobilized into the Russian army to the total population, the people are not protesting. For some reason, it is quite difficult to explain exactly why this is happening in Russia today. Well, I lived in Russia back in the 1980s. I studied in the city of Kaliningrad, and then I served my time in the military out in the Far East. It truly feels as though I have a deep understanding of the Russian people, but unfortunately, I find myself unable to accurately describe or understand the modern Russian people now. This is probably a question of social psychology. The extraordinary willingness of the Russian people to go to their own slaughter, not for some grand purpose or noble cause, not for any kind of higher or noble purpose, but solely for the personal whims and the specific wishes of their authoritarian dictator Vladimir Putin, his own. Whether it's his inner circle, his generals, or his colonels. In general, the Russian people, ordinary Russians and Russian soldiers, are treated as cannon fodder. No one really cares about them, but obviously they shouldn't be indifferent. Shouldn't the relatives and neighbors of those Russian soldiers who are being sent to fight in Russia's war of aggression care? Or is all of this decided by the authorities and the Kalyanians? Well, I don't know. It's a complicated question.
Pavel, well, let's really talk about what's happening on the various fronts. Let's note that the situation in the Pokrovsk-Mirnograd agglomeration area remains difficult. There are signs that the Russian occupiers are preparing to intensify their offensive and may use their accumulated reserves. This was reported in particular by the spokesperson for the Vostok-Shapoval military group. According to him, the Russians are increasing the number of airstrikes and are now using other means of firepower more actively. Despite this, the defense forces units continue to hold their positions on the northern outskirts of Pokrovsk and Mirnograd. Commander-in-Chief Syrsky also spoke about the situation in the Donetsk region. In particular, he noted that the armed forces of Ukraine are holding defensive lines in the Donetsk region and in certain directions are conducting active offensive operations. According to your information, what is happening there now? Let's first talk about the Eastern Front, and then in the next few minutes of our conversation, we'll move on closer to the south.
Well, you see, we started right away, and everything here is interconnected. Yes, on the one hand. Pokrovsk-Mirnograd direction. The enemy has actually captured it, Pokrovsk-Mirnograd. Local defense will be introduced in certain areas. In Pokrovsk and Mirnograd, as well as the defense of settlements located north of Pokrovsk and Mirnograd. Why are Russians rushing to the north? Because, as an example, that Dobropilsky ledge, already many months ago, the false start of the Russian army, the task is to cover them. The Ukrainian defense forces stationed throughout the agglomeration, like Konstantinovka, Kramatorsk, and Slavyansk, cut them off from the north and south. But Pokrovsk-Mirnograd is such a junction that it strikes at their flanks and rear and allows the Russian command's original plan to be carried out. As long as this fortified stronghold continues to operate, it remains very difficult to manage. But that is exactly how the current situation is shaping up for us right now. During the assaults on Pokrovsk and Mirnograd, the Russians have suffered significant losses. And now carrying out that maneuver to get behind the defense forces is a rather dubious undertaking. However, judging by certain signs, the command of those Russian divisions and armies operating in this direction have not abandoned their objectives. At the same time, one sign that this direction may no longer be the key one is that some of the forces that had been storming Pokrovsk-Mirnograd in previous months are now being pulled by the Russian High Command from the Pokrovsk direction to the south, toward the area of Hulyapol and adjacent sectors. To put it in a slightly different way, if the original plan had continued to be treated as a top priority, it is quite clear that such actions would never have been taken. Or, things are not going so well for the Russians in the south, in the Orikhiv area. That's why it's necessary to monitor both the southern and eastern directions at the same time. Right now, they're trying to storm Konstantinivka from 3 actual flanks. Yes, this is a tactical maneuver. It's a tactical encirclement, but it's just a tactical encirclement. This is not that strategic plan. The strategic offensive that Russian generals were drawing for themselves on maps, even in the summer of 2022 and in the fall of 2025. And
Let's discuss the southern direction in more detail. What opportunities do the Russian occupiers have there, and what is actually within our power? Counterattacks by the Ukrainian army on the southern front could disrupt Russia's plan for a new offensive. This concerns a possible campaign in the spring and summer of 2026. This is stated in a report by the Institute for the Study of War. Analysts note that Ukrainian forces are successfully counterattacking in several areas at once. In the area of Oleksandrivka, Huliapol, and in the western part of Zaporizhzhia region. So, according to their assessment, such actions can influence the situation not only tactically, but also on a broader level, and ultimately hinder Russia's plans to carry out. The time we have gained is not just theoretical, but is also noted by the Institute for the Study of War. No one doubts the armed forces of Ukraine. But in your opinion, is the support from Ukraine's partners sufficient right now? Are there enough resources to implement these plans as intended? That the Russian occupiers are preparing a spring offensive? Absolutely. And if we recall, every season they have some kind of plans like this, retreats, they're not going to abandon them, and Putin isn't particularly striving for peace.
well, as for the enemy's plans for the next campaign, spring, summer, summer campaign, summer, autumn, call it whatever you like, it will primarily depend on the resources that the Russians manage to accumulate and preserve. The second point is no less important. Of the forces that have already been, and to preserve and restore from those forces that were involved in the offensive in the autumn winter of 2025 to 2026. Therefore, initially, it could be assumed that the Russians might conduct an offensive, to plan an offensive along a broad front, taking advantage of their superiority in forces both in the south and in the east simultaneously. Now, the counterattacks by the Ukrainian defense forces in the south do not completely rule out such a possibility for them, but make it significantly less likely. Why? Despite the successful operational strikes by the defense forces to the north of Huliapol, the Russians continue, well, to the north, that is, from the south, from the Donetsk-Zaporizhzhia highway, this entire strip. Currently, the Russian forces are desperately trying to defend their positions to the north, while simultaneously to the south, they continue their persistent offensive operations along our established defensive line, which was carefully engineered a very long time ago and runs continuously from the north all the way to the south. Thus, if they decide to completely abandon their flanking maneuver around the Orikhiv direction, their primary and minimum strategic objective is to systematically destroy or successfully capture this fortified defensive line, which has already become firmly established and stable. This clearly indicates that they are not abandoning their theoretical plans for a major offensive in the Zaporizhzhia direction.
Pavel, thank you so much for finding the time to join our live broadcast today. And you know, Pavel, I really want to thank you also for all these 4 years, because today actually marks a full 4 years since we started. Since the moment Freedom TV channel aired its very first broadcast, you have been helping us for all these 4 years to carry the truth about what is happening on various fronts and to speak openly about it to our viewers. To our viewers across the ocean, on the European continent, in Asia, in Central Asia, in the territory of the Russian Federation, in Moscow or St. Petersburg as well. Thank you so much. Pavel Lakichuk, Head of Military Programs at the Center for Global Studies and Strategy 21.